Mozambique. It's an African nation where the peace is imposed over the bullets, a premise full of compromise between the government and the opposition. Some days have passed since a historical agreement has put an end to a conflict, and the hope is now all over. However, there were two failed attempts, so let's see what makes it different now. Why will it work this time? These questions will be set to analyze Mozambique, a peace agreement. This is what we're going to be doing today. Let's start. In 2 days that were historical, the president of Mozambique and the leader of the resistance of Mozambique signed a treaty that puts an end of decades of a conflict and tries to establish a peaceful environment. This is the third peace treaty that has been signed ever since it became independent from Portugal. The first one, there was a conflict in August, in the middle of Mozambique. Then there was a ceremony with some other presidents too. And this is what the people who signed said. The agreement that we just signed is an agreement between equals that have decided not to keep on killing themselves. It's not an agreement between enemies. It shows that we don't want any more war, never again between ourselves. The end of the fire, the ceasefire, must mean a new era that should be characterized by accepting the different ways of thinking. We were speaking about international actors, and now Federica Mogherini, in behalf of the European Union, was a president of the negotiation table. And this is what she said on the signature. In a world where there are many conflicts, where everything seems to go in the wrong direction, Mozambique is giving us hope. We feel proud of this, and we are proud of the president of the president tonight. And before the signing on August 1st, the United States could not be left with anything unsaid. I think it's a important day for the Mozambican people. It's the beginning of a peace process that will bring more stability. I think that there will be more prosperity for both parties. So these are the political actors, both international and the nationals, and now we're going to see the location of Mozambique. Mozambique, a gas enclave and coastline coveted by major powers. It's located in the southeast of Africa. On the north, it has a limit of Tanzania and Malawi, northwest with Zambia, west with Zimbabwe, southwest with the Kingdom of Swaziland, southwest with South Africa, to the east to the Indian Ocean. It is also next to Madagascar and other islands. Its capital city is Maputo. It has almost 30 million inhabitants and a surface of 799,380 square kilometers. It has a geopolitical relevance to several aspects. One, it possesses a lot of gas. It has 4.2 million cubic meters in the Rovuma Basin. And once it begins to export, which has been delayed to 2022, it could become one of the larger exporters of the world. Second, Mozambique's channel. It is a zone of the Indian Oceans of 600 square kilometers that connects most parts, through which most of the transit goes by. It's also a crucial pivot of the Indian-Brazil-South Africa axis. Este canal está llamado a convertirse en pivote crucial del eje India-Brasil-Sudáfrica. It has, whoever controls Mozambique controls an economic zone very rich in resources. Great powers litigate over the Mozambican gas. France managed several overseas provinces near the strategic route.
Francia administra varias provincias de ultramar próximas a esta estratégica ruta del Cabo.
And third, Mozambique is in the middle of the planet of the continent. Due to its border and its huge coastal, it's a major transfer point for drugs. There's where we can see the location and strategic of Mozambique. Let's see the digital web pages to add more information. Let's start with, no, I don't think it's this one. Let's change it, please. Meanwhile, let's present another one. It says, well, we still don't have it online. The UN, Antonio Guterres, has recognized the work of the President of Mozambique in seeking direct conversations and his compromise to finalize their peace process. Let's go to the next one. Let's find it. This is the one we were speaking of. The UN is pleased with the signing of the agreement of peace in Mozambique. And there is a compromise of this organization for both parties to reconcile for a genuine and fulfilling agreement. Here we have it, a historical gesture of Mozambique with the upcoming visit of the Pope. This will be a very political visit, more than a religious one. This, with that hug, there's an end, there's a ceasefire to years of conflict. And this is in the upcoming visit of the Pope to Mozambique. He will be there from the 4th to the 10th of September. This was a historical moment. And there were two African presidents, the South African and the one from Rwanda too. Now let's deepen this topic. Here we have more information. It's in humane organization, it's in humane.org, and it speaks about children. It says that 70% of the people live below the poverty lines, and the expectancy is 48 years. 142% of death rate. The numbers are awful, and the main reason of death is malaria. One of every five children doesn't go to school because it's not obligatory nor free. In other topics, it's thought that 1.4 orphan children have to go on their own. There are almost no help for this vulnerable population. It was common to have children in the army, and the problem still is ongoing. But the consequences of having been spent in armed forces makes it harder to insert them in their normal lives. Let's go adding more information. Let's go to Congo with our correspondent Oscar Pérez. Hello. The latest peace agreement still leaves some loose strings. However, it will be now approved as a law in the parliament. The current president wanted to demobilize all of the militia before the October elections. However, it's not so probable this happened because there's a lack of compromise of the people that are leaving these armies to be reinserted in society. Regardless of the peace process of 1992 and 2014, the opposition still keeps the weapons while they ask that their members be inserted in the national army. However, the president doesn't allow it. Another problem is that this, as well as other agreements, are considered as pact between elites. The agreement apparently has been also helped with monetary compensations. And now Renamo said some words, and he asked as a condition for the treaty that the government of Mozambique and the international community fulfill the promises that they had stated supporting them. A self-determined military coup has become within the Renamo, and they reject the peace treatment. So there is a period of negotiation internally within the guerrillas of Renamo that originally was financed and created during the Cold War by Zimbabwe, South Africa, and other international allies. At the end of the 21st century, the promise is peace and work as condition for social development and economic development, still pending for the greater majority of the population. And there's huge pieces of land and tropical forests with a huge reserve of graphite and natural gas that will make Mozambique the third largest exporter of rubies, wood. The conditions are given for Mozambique to start working. And the government that originally was Marxist and now sets dialogue and asks everybody to sit to the table. Well, now China and U.S. are the U.S. allies in the research and to support the government, so there will not be no violence in this area. They're trying to gather the capital to invest in the development of the projects. And the risks are corruption and other type of blockades of the democratic control. And to avoid the advance, and the advance is not to make the breaches between rich and poor bigger. In any case, there's a huge collective challenge, and the peace is the condition. Renamo is the last guerrilla that has been inactive for many years, and it's necessary that they set an example to strengthen the cohesion of the country and to confront the ghost of war that is still trying to wake up in the northern part. Back to you. Thank you, Oscar. More about the panorama of what this event and this peace agreement implies. Today we're analyzing peace agreement in Mozambique. What are the conditions, the necessary norms for this agreement to be a long-term one, and that it will last, not like the two previous ones? We'll be right back. We're back in Mozambique Peace Project. It's important to see how the internal situation of this African country is facing the upcoming election. Let's remember that these general elections are both for president and they're within the peace agreement. The peace agreement signed by the main political forces in Mozambique is the third one since its independence in 1975. Frelimo, that took over the war after Portugal, and that is a left-right, as well as Renamo, signed this agreement that allowed them to come to the 15th of October elections in the context of peace. Renamo has strong combats that led almost 6,000 citizens to leave to Malawi. On August 31st, the campaign will start, and they will also elect local authorities. The election will be October 15th, the sixth one since the Constitution of 1992. Frelimo is the official party and tries to re-elect Felipe Renuzzi. Renamo is presenting Osufo Monmade. This is the first time that Renamo does not have their traditional leader. There's also David Rimesango of MDM. Let's go with the analysis from Mexico. We have Arcelia Flor. She's a lawyer and an expert in African topics. Good afternoon, Tatiana. And from Argentina, we have Sergio Galeano. He's a university professor and also an international expert. Arcelia, let's start with the analysis. There are great challenges when it comes to the peace treaty in a country that have so many complexities, but I would like to ask you about the agreement. Why is it not public? Why do you think this is? Well, in first term, I think that they're protecting they're still working on some details, because there are things that they're now working in more depth, so there will be no failure like the two previous agreements. Let's not forget that the history of the Portuguese colonies has been torturous after that they obtained their independence, and Mozambique is not the exception. So as well as other actors were there on the signing, this also gives us a lot to think that there are great expectations, and it's a process that it better be taken step by step, very carefully, so it will not fail at the first moment. Mr. Gariana, about all this expectation, is there more attention on behalf of the principal actors internally, or in the international actors that move the African chess? Well, I think in this case that the international position is decisive, because any increase of the hostilities of behalf of the Renamo will call a rejection of all of the African countries, of South Africa and Rwanda, and their positions are extremely important. And this, if they do support this peace process, they would reject receiving refugees from the Renamo. And there's another fundamental aspect that has to do with the financing of the implementation of the agreement, which has to do with guaranteeing inserting the people of Renamo in the local government and the society itself. So it's important to have this international contest to help out on the implementation of the peace agreement. And in that sense, it opens a great expectation to think that the elections will be in peace and that there will be a peaceful transition too. Well, the European Union, Federica Mogherini, who went to the central act of the signing of this peace treaty, she says that 60 million euros will be put to the implementation. But a country with so many needs, maybe 60 million euros, is that going to be enough with all of the challenges they have up ahead? Well, to begin with, one of the main problems of the implementation of the demobilization processes with the post-conflict processes have to do that the post-conflict in general, there has to be a firm compromise to help the people to leave the war and insert themselves in society. Well, first, there has to be those 60 million. If the 60 million have to be put in the economy, so the economy will start to move, and then it will be easier for these people to reinsert themselves. And there are very optimistic prospects because with all of these natural resources that Mozambique has themselves, well, this stability might be attained. And parting from these 60 million, well, the Mozambique economy can start to grow. And maybe they can find a positive future for all of the Mozambique population. Well, let's not forget that 70% of the people of Mozambique are below the poverty lines. Let's go to Professor Arcelia. I was speaking with Professor Galeana of the demobilizations. It's important to put down the weapons, especially with two previous processes that have been failed. So now I want to ask you in terms of the elections of October 15th, and this is going to be the first time that local authorities will be elected, because before the authorities were just pointed out by finger. So, will the country accept anybody who's elected? Well, ideally, that is the great challenge. I think. Oh, I think it cut. No, Professor, I hear you. Well, I asked production to please call her again. Professor Galeana, did you ask the question? Well, I think that now electing local authorities and that there's going to be electoral transparency, the objective is obviously has to do with the internal process within RENAMO. And we have to understand that within RENAMO there are also some groups. And of course, they do not. Some groups within RENAMO do not accept the peace process. And so it's important to see if the leadership in RENAMO is strong enough to lead the whole process through. Because apparently there are like 5,400 RENAMO people that were involved in this war. And there's a organized militia that must be demobilized, and therefore we will see a clear reflection of the peace process. And effectively, there has to be international pressure to go through with all this. And everybody, along with transparency in the elections, should respect the results. Without a doubt, that's the great challenge. Please stay with us. Let's go back to see some history. A country that went through an awful war. There are millions of
La lucha por la independencia fue liderada
The struggle
por el
for
Frente de Liberación
independence
Mozambique, un grupo guerrillero que
was
se
led by
enfrentó
an
a las
independence
fuerzas
group
portuguesas desde la vecina Tanzania.
who was led
Era
since Tanzania.
1975, auge de
It
la
was
Guerra Fría. El
1975, in
Frente
the
de
height of the
Liberación de
Cold War,
Mozambique, dirigido por el entonces presidente Samora Machel,
led
se
by
ubicó del lado
Mozambique.
de la Unión Soviética. Muchos de los jóvenes
Many of the young people of
fueron a
Mozambique
Cuba y los países de la Cortina de Hierro. Mozambique
were
era
killed.
vecina de la
Mozambique
Sudáfrica
was
más racista y
neighboring
donde imperaba el apartheid. Para esta nación,
of
tener un
South
vecino
Africa
como
where there's
Mozambique, en
apartheid.
donde no había racismo, era un peligro, ya que no solo apoyaba a las guerrillas que luchaban
They
contra el
supported the
apartheid,
guerrillas.
sino que podía tener un efecto contagio. Fue por ello que en
That's why in 1977, South Africa supported and financed the creation of the anti-communist guerrillas that was called the Resistance, and it's called Renamo. And Renamo was able to control most of the parts of the country. For 15 years, Mozambique saw many terrible things. After the war, there was over 1 million dead and several displaced. 1992, the peace process, the first one, was signed. However, it was not fruitful because the people were not reinserted in the social life. That is part of the necessary revision of history. There's a lot of hope for peace. Well, now we have our professor back from Mexico. Now we have a question. Let's see if you have something to add, because before the communication was cut off. Now we have four candidates for the presidency. What I can say is that there's a process that should be carried through, so this new peace process be successful beyond the elections of presidents, which I think is just a part of a whole process in Mozambique. I think there should be a reconciliation, national reconciliation, because what we have as a challenge is not just demobilizing the country and not only having the president, which all of the parts accept. So that's why I think that I think there should be a big effort of reconciliation, where all of the groups participate. Otherwise, faced with any type of small failure, we could be facing results where the first consequence could be the rebirth of the conflicts. Although the parts have said that everything will come back, because history tells us that there is a tendency, and the unfortunate circle might start again. Those are one of the big risks. And it's how to include the victims, the displaced people, all of those who suffered, and how to repair their lives, and how not to leave anybody behind. Well, I think that this topic has been left outside the agreements, and I think it's one of the things that most conflict creates, because we're confronted in a process, as we all know, that the process includes an amnesty law which guarantees the leaders of both movements there will not be imprisoned, which, from my point of view, I think that it could be opposed to the need of the victims and the relatives of the victims to pursue any violations of human rights that have gone on for 40 and more years. Why do I say that this will take to a direct confrontation? Because on one hand, that some consider the amnesty law, but not the whole process doesn't take into account there should be it doesn't take into account the reparations for the relatives, because this is another process. But I think it's one of the things that should go hand in hand in the reconciliation process. Let's not forget the process of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. That was not easy. And we have been, and that there are things that are still in process. So, as we can say, it's not something that will not be able to be regularized in 1 or 2 years. Well, it might take decades, but it's fundamental that the victims be taken into account. Professor Galeana, about the other conflicts of terrorist groups and that are beyond the law, that are trying to find local control. What is the threat to the peace process? Well, in the past months, in the past 2 years, there have been incidents in Mozambique that talk about some Islamic groups, but it's not really clear. It's not clear that this is so. The truth is that there were armed groups in the north of the country that are part of Renamo and that question the leadership of Renamo right now. And of course, it becomes hard for Renamo to control all of the factions within the group. Well, I think it is dangerous because these groups might start again. So let's see the characteristics of these armed groups. So now that's why we need international pressure, so there will be assistance and oversight to continue with this process and to shut down any groups that might want to bombard this process. So what is important is to avoid any type of conflict, because this is what allows everything else to continue on. In a process where the voices of the victims, in terms of legal terms of amnesty, political agreements, to agree a peace in the country, it is necessary to listen to the victims, to hear their voices. And then we will seek ways to work with the victims and to compensate them in any which way. I think it's a reconciliation that is fundamented on the need, on the possibility of bringing out the truth, and that they have a voice that is considered. Well, I think it's important to guarantee, in first place, the agreements and to fundamentally avoid any type of uproar and that all of the international support be useful. Thank you very much, Professor Galeano. Until the next time. Celia, thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you, Tatiana. Let's go to a pause, a very brief pause, the second one of Mozambique peace agreement. When we come back, we'll see in the midst of the scenario, what does it mean, the posture of the actors internationally, and what is the role of the transnational, and what is their weight in all of this. We'll be right back. Please stay with us. We're back with the critical moves. We're speaking of Mozambique and the peace agreement. We have to analyze some other aspects. The great resources of the country and the interest of the transnationals behind all of these. Mozambique is a country with great important resources, especially with the gas reserves that have been discovered just a couple of years ago. These military groups that are linked to terrorist groups show how a part of the hard struggle within Mozambique, there are like 100 cells within them. With gas, natural gas has attracted a lot of the great powers. China is the country that has most invested in infrastructure. And let's not forget that Russia also has a lot of investment there. Another resource that was discovered was graphite. The Australian company Tratite announced that they had found the biggest graphite deposits in the world. This is important to make batteries for electric cars. On the other hand, the richness of Mozambique is given by the huge mineral resources that have like 40% of the rubies. Russia has also been important, their presence. In 2018, there was an agreement for cooperation. Sergei Lavrov said that Russia shares the determination of Mozambique to carry out bilateral relationships. These are elements to analyze. We have now our guests. Somebody that knows a lot about Africa. Now let's analyze the importance of each of the actors that I will be calling out their names. United States. What are their interests? Were there imperialistic interests? We're speaking of a peace process that has taken a lot, because it puts an end to many internal conflicts. So here, we're trying to normalize a relationship. And from my point of view, we see that the internal phase is not yet ready. There has not been turning in of weapons. There is a compromise, but it hasn't made factual. We have to take in the rebels because they don't believe in the government structure and dialogue. So it's not easy. This process is not easy. It's necessary to have a local integration. There needs some time for normalization. Now, if you speak about the U.S., it's an empire. Because if there's any strategic interest, they're always there. Any peace process in countries that are allied to them. Well, now we know that this country is an ally to Russia. And of course, Russia is opposed to the U.S. They're on the contrary so there cannot be a real peace process. Let's not forget that the European Union delegate is there. But internally, things are not ready yet. Now,
esto implica una nueva pugna por la presencia de transnacionales.
Well, there could be some conflicts because of the presence of transnational companies. Well, let's not forget that these both parties sat down at the table because they're now faced with a third threat, which is an Islamic group that is coming in through the north. And they're trying to recruit poor people so there can be a rebellion and an imposition of terrorist groups. Now, who mobilizes, who funds these terrorist groups? If you see the map of the African continent, it's surrounded by a new ISIS in the north between Libya and the Algeria. We saw it in the west. We see it now in Mozambique. So this circle of terrorism exists. And there's an armed conflict that is always financed by the empires. At the same time, what is at hand? The exploitation of the natural resources. We know that there's a gas reserve that's really important. That there is a natural channel. Where is the U.S. in this? When they're at war with China. All of this makes this peace process very vulnerable. And not only the peace process, but the upcoming elections. Well, who will win the election? What's the agenda? What are the allies? It seems that whoever sets the economic strategies. So, are they going to be allies of Europe? Or the Americans? Or are there going to be allies of the other side, or of China, or is with Russia? When the direct competition of Mozambique is Qatar, we can see that now it's a war of straits, where for the investors, in the gas subject, it's a high risk. Now we see a Mozambique that is away from the straits, where of course they have direct access to China and ASEAN and all of the consumers of this gas. And when we see this huge network of cooperation, in any case, Russia will not be left out. Will this create a new tension between Russia and the U.S.? Well, of course, all of these things are taking the world to a new Cold War. Let's pay attention to what's going on in Nicaragua, because all of the straits are fundamental for the world. We've never seen before a China that has a military base in the Horn of Africa. And they're trying to preserve their natural channel. But there's a specific point that must be highlighted. Just not for long ago, we were speaking of Sri Lanka, that is adjacent to the coast of Mozambique. We're speaking of a South Africa that is next borders with South Africa. And it's an ally of it's part of the BRICS. And we have the ports there. Let's not forget the terrorist attacks on Sri Lanka, where the investors were mainly Chinese. So let's see what might happen, because there are many strategic points. And there are many natural resources, a port, empire, market, and the presence of terrorism supported by the empire. I understand your concern. There's a formula that, as we can see, the scenario, Mozambique will not be left out. I have another question. What's going on with South Africa? What is their role in all of this situation? So now what is their position? Of course, South Africa is an emerging market. We're speaking of a BRICS member. It's a new financial market. We're speaking of a new horizon. And we're speaking of a country that is a border with Mozambique, where the stability of peace is necessary for their development, for their internal development. Now it's an ally, of course, but in a regional area, it's important to add some points of peace and not subtract tranquility. So at the end of the day, peace must prevail. Thank you very much, Isabel. We have finished with our analysis. Let's go to our conclusions.
Lo decíamos, la paz es el mejor escenario posible sobre cualquier otro, para cualquier otro, si es la guerra, la desestabilización, lo que sea,
all of the rest would be devastating for Mozambique. The challenges for implementing the peace process are huge. The compromise with the international community has also is done through this peace process, which the terms are secret. And this causes suspicions. However, the first commitment is free elections on October 15. For the government, for the state, this will be a fundamental test for this democracy that is trying to go to peace. Let's not forget, 70% of the people are under the line of poverty. How this story will now unveil This is what we've been analyzing. This is the end of our critical moves. See you tomorrow.